There's a moment that happens in nearly every family touched by dementia, a moment they replay over and over, wishing they could go back. It's not the diagnosis. It's the months, sometimes years, before it, when the signs were already there, quietly, and everyone mistook them for something else. A forgotten name, a missed bill, a strange joke that didn't quite land. What if the earliest warning signs of dementia don't look like memory loss at all? What if, by the time forgetfulness becomes obvious, the disease has already been at work for over a decade? Dementia doesn't begin the day someone forgets their own address. According to research from the Alzheimer's Association and long-term studies, published in journals like The Lancet, changes in the brain can start 10 to 20 years before symptoms become noticeable enough for a diagnosis. That means the real warning signs are subtle. They hide in plain sight, disguised as stress, aging, or personality quirks. By the end of this video, you'll know the 7 signs doctors and researchers say are most commonly missed, why they get overlooked, and what actually separates normal aging from something more serious. The 7th sign is the one most families say, looking back, they wish they'd taken seriously first. Sign 1. Let's start with a sign that almost never gets connected to brain health. Withdrawal from conversation. Not memory, not confusion, just a person slowly talking less. Researchers who study early cognitive decline have found that following a conversation with multiple people or keeping up with a fast-moving group chat requires an enormous amount of mental coordination. It means tracking who said what, holding context, and responding in real time. When that ability quietly erodes, people don't announce it. They just stop trying. They let others carry the conversation. Families often describe this as someone becoming quiet or mellowing with age, when in some cases, it's the brain protecting itself from a task that's become exhausting. This alone isn't a red flag, but paired with other changes, it's often one of the earliest ones. And that leads to a sign that's even easier to dismiss, because it looks like a personality trait. Sign 2. That sign is difficulty with planning or problem solving. Not forgetting where you put your keys, but struggling to follow a recipe you've made 100 times, or losing track of monthly bills that were once handled without a second thought. Cognitive scientists refer to this as a decline in executive function, the brain's ability to organize steps and hold a plan in mind while carrying it out. It's a different system from memory itself, which is part of why it gets missed. A person can still remember their childhood vividly while struggling to follow it. 4-step process. Family members often chalk it up to being overwhelmed or not as sharp as they used to be. But when a lifelong bookkeeper starts making basic errors, or a confident cook starts leaving steps out of familiar meals, that's not a character shift. It's a functional one, and it often shows up before anyone thinks to mention it to a doctor. Sign 3. Here's where things get more surprising. Mood and personality changes are now recognized by researchers as some of the earliest indicators of certain types of dementia, sometimes appearing years before memory problems begin. This isn't ordinary moodiness. It's a noticeable shift, someone who was easygoing becoming irritable, or someone social becoming flat and indifferent. A 2021 study published in JAMA Neurology found that new-onset depression, or apathy in older adults, was associated with a meaningfully higher risk of later dementia diagnosis. The tricky part is that these changes get treated as isolated mental health issues, and sometimes they are. But when mood changes appear alongside subtle thinking changes, doctors increasingly view them as 2 symptoms of the same underlying process, not 2 separate problems. So if mood can shift before memory does, what about the senses? It turns out one of them may offer an even earlier clue. Sign 4. That sense is smell. It sounds almost too simple to matter, but a declining sense of smell, medically called hyposmia, has been studied extensively as an early marker of neurodegenerative disease. The olfactory bulb, the part of the brain that processes smell, is one of the first regions affected in certain forms of dementia, sometimes years before diagnosis. Studies tracking older adults have found that those who struggled to identify common odors, like coffee, smoke, or lemon, had a higher likelihood of developing cognitive decline within the following years. To be clear, this is an area of ongoing research. And a poor sense of smell can come from many harmless causes, including sinus issues or normal aging. But researchers see it as one more data point, a subtle biological signal that something in the brain's early warning system may already be changing. From the nose, we move to something equally unexpected, the way someone walks. Disrupted sleep, particularly a specific type called REM sleep behavior disorder, where a person physically acts out their dreams, has been linked in research to a significantly elevated risk of developing certain neurodegenerative conditions later in life. Beyond that specific disorder, general sleep disruption matters too. During deep sleep, the brain runs a kind of nightly cleanup process, clearing out metabolic waste products, including a protein called beta amyloid that's associated with Alzheimer's disease. Chronic poor sleep may interfere with that clearing process. Scientists are still working to fully understand the direction of this relationship, whether poor sleep contributes to cognitive decline, whether early cognitive decline disrupts sleep, or both. But the association itself is well documented enough that sleep quality is now considered a meaningful piece of the early picture, not just an unrelated inconvenience. And that brings us to the seventh sign, the one so many families say they noticed first but understood last. It's difficulty judging distance or navigating familiar spaces, getting turned around in a grocery store you've shopped at for 20 years, misjudging a step or a curb, struggling to park in a space that used to be effortless. This relates to changes in how the brain processes visual and spatial information, a function tied closely to memory-related regions. It's frequently mistaken for clumsiness or simply not paying attention, especially because it can appear before any obvious memory problems. But clinicians who specialize in early dementia detection say this sign, when it appears alongside 2 or 3 of the others, is one of the strongest combined indicators that something deeper may be happening. On its own, it means very little. Everyone misjudges a curb occasionally. It's the pattern, several of these signs appearing together and progressively worsening, that matters far more than any single moment. None of these 7 signs, on their own, mean a person has dementia. Quiet conversations, a messy sleep schedule, a change in mood, a fading sense of smell, a slower walk, a struggle with planning, a moment of spatial confusion. These things happen to healthy brains too. What separates normal aging from early warning is pattern and progression. Not a single bad day, but a slow, consistent shift across months and years. The families who catch this earliest aren't the ones with medical degrees. They're the ones who trust a quiet feeling that something has changed and take it seriously enough to ask a doctor instead of waiting for proof. Early conversations don't just lead to earlier diagnosis. In many cases, they lead to more time, more clarity, and more choices for the people we love. If MedClear helped you understand your health a little better today, that's exactly what this channel is here for. Hit like so more people can find trustworthy answers too. And drop your questions in the comments. I read every one. Subscribe to MedClear Healthcare for more clear, evidence-based videos every week. Because understanding your health shouldn't be complicated.